waking up early. It feels like it's everywhere right now,
It really does.
You've got the classic early bird gets the worm, sure. But then there's this whole modern 5 a.m. club trend.
Right, that whole movement.
And this persistent idea that getting up super early is, I don't know, like a cheat code for success and well-being.
Yeah.
But is it?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Is waking up early genuinely the key? Or is there, a lot more going on?
Yeah.
We've got a really interesting mix of material here today. Some articles, some research studies, even some personal perspectives someone shared with us.
A good collection. So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear, I think. We want to try and cut through some of the noise, look closely at these sources, pull out the key insights, the facts, and really help you, the listener, understand what's actually being reported about waking up early, the effects on productivity, health, well-being. It's about seeing what's really important in all this information.
Fantastic. So based on this material, let's start with the positive spin, the compelling pitch.
Okay.
What are the big reported upsides? Why are so many people, chasing this idea?
Well, several sources point to some pretty enticing potential benefits. We can probably group them into a few key areas just to make sense of it all.
Good idea.
First up, let's look at the physical side, your energy and overall health.
Okay.
One source mentions that your body has this natural cortisol production cycle.
Right. The stress hormone? Or is it more than that?
Well, yeah, it gets labeled that, but it also plays a key role in stimulating wakefulness.
Yeah.
And for most people, cortisol levels naturally peak around, say, 8 a.m. So the idea here is that aligning your wake time closer to that natural peak might give you a more sort of organic energy boost for the day.
That makes sense. Tapping into your body's rhythm.
Exactly. And here's something potentially surprising from one source. It links early rising to better metabolic health.
Really? How so?
They found evidence suggesting people who wake up earlier tend to utilize more fat, both when resting and during exercise, compared to late risers. And they also show greater insulin sensitivity, which, could translate to a lower risk of things like type 2 diabetes down the line.
Wow, okay, so a deeper metabolic connection.
Seems like it. Plus, early risers might just be more likely to fit in physical activity earlier in the day and maybe be less sedentary overall.
It's getting moving sooner.
Yeah. And interestingly, there's even a study included here that focused on really young kids, 12 to 40 months old.
Little ones.
Right. And it found a significant correlation. Earlier waking time was linked to higher physical activity levels. Kids waking before 7:30 a.m. in this study were just, more active than those waking later.
Wow, so potential links to energy use, metabolism, just moving more, and maybe starting really young.
Seems that way.
Okay, what about the mental side? How does it supposedly affect your state of mind?
That brings us to mental health and mood, and the sources are quite positive here too, generally speaking. Early mornings are often described as, quieter, calmer.
Definitely less email noise, usually.
Exactly. So this can create a feeling of starting the day more gently, maybe without that immediate rush and chaos. One article notes that this sense of feeling more in control of those first few hours can significantly reduce feelings of stress and anxiety.
I can see that. Less reactive, more proactive.
Precisely. And exposure to natural light in the morning gets highlighted quite a bit.
Sunlight.
Yeah. Getting that sunlight early helps increase serotonin, the feel-good chemical, right? Contributing to a better mood. And being more in sync with the natural light-dark cycles, your circadian rhythm, that internal 24-hour clock.
That keeps coming up.
It does. It's repeatedly mentioned as potentially regulating mood and even reducing symptoms for people maybe predisposed to things like depression and anxiety.
That's significant.
Yeah, one study in these sources even found early risers had something like a 12 to 27% lower risk of depression.
Yeah.
And consistent sleep patterns aligned with natural light are actually noted as a strategy used in treating depression.
Less stress, better mood, potentially helping with anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
That sounds like a powerful set of reported benefits.
It does.
And of course, the big one everyone talks about, productivity, is that classic early birds are more productive idea actually backed up in these sources.
Yes, this is definitely a frequently cited benefit.
Okay.
The reasoning often given is that after you've had enough sleep, your brain's prefrontal cortex, think of it as the brain's CEO.
Right, the planning and decision part.
Exactly. It's rejuvenated, ready for action. So the morning hours are often described as prime time for focus, a complex problem-solving creative thinking. often just because there are fewer distractions.
The quiet helps.
For sure, that quiet environment can be a real boost for creative work, free from the usual barrage of emails, notifications, interruptions.
Makes sense.
And maybe the simplest, most tangible benefit is just having extra time before the typical workday or daily demands really kick in.
Right, that buffer.
Yeah. Time you can dedicate to personal development, maybe work on a side project, or just have some quiet me time. Plus, getting tasks done early, there's a psychological lift there too. A sense of accomplishment, getting those early wins.
Yeah, builds momentum.
Exactly. It can really build motivation for the rest of the day.
Okay, so on the surface, based on these sources, there's a pretty compelling case being made for waking up early. We're talking links to physical health, better mood, more productivity.
It sounds good, doesn't it?
It does. But does this picture really hold up when we look closer? Is it truly as simple as just setting your alarm earlier and suddenly unlocking all this goodness?
Yeah, and this raises that important question. The sources pretty quickly pivot to a more nuanced perspective.
Ah, okay.
It seems it's definitely not just about the time on the clock.
So it sounds like it's not a magic bullet then.
Exactly right. Not a magic, but several sources, and especially some of the personal experiences shared, really emphasize that just forcing yourself awake early, especially if you don't compensate by going to bed earlier, well, it can be counterproductive.
How so?
It often leads straight to fatigue, grogginess, and that negatively impacts the very things you're trying to improve, like your productivity and your mood.
Right, you're just tired and grumpy.
Pretty much. The absolute critical foundation, stressed across multiple sources here, is getting sufficient quality sleep.
Okay, sleep first.
Absolutely. One study specifically noted performance generally improved with more hours of sleep. The message is really clear. Trying to gain early hours by sacrificing sleep duration is consistently described as, well, detrimental. Bad idea.
Got it. Don't trade sleep for early waking.
Right. And it's not just about the total hours either. There's a study on medical students included here that found something particularly interesting.
Okay.
While, yes, more sleep generally helped their performance, it was the timing of sleep specifically, going to bed earlier, that correlated more closely with better academic performance and lower anxiety than just the total number of hours they slept.
Huh. So the when mattered more than the how much in that case.
It seemed to, yeah. Which strongly reinforced this idea that aligning with a consistent schedule, maybe tied to those natural light cues we mentioned, is really key.
Consistency again.
Absolutely. Irregular sleep-wake schedules are repeatedly linked in these sources to fatigue, mood issues, and impaired performance.
So it's not just how much sleep, but when you sleep and how consistently you do it. That's the takeaway.
Precisely. Which brings us right back to the concept of circadian rhythm.
The body clock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our internal 24-hour cycle. It's powerfully influenced by light, especially morning light.
Okay.
Waking up at a consistent time and getting that light exposure early helps set the rhythm. And that synchronization makes it easier to feel awake during the day and signals your body when it's time to wind down for sleep at night.
And messing that up causes problems.
Right. Disruptions are strongly linked to mood issues and just general dysfunction.
Okay. What else?
Well, this also leads naturally into the idea of chronotypes.
Ah, the night owls and early birds thing.
Exactly. These sources discuss how some individuals are just sort of naturally predisposed to be night owls. Later sleep and wake times feel more natural for them. Others are early birds.
So what's the advice there? Force it or follow it?
Well, there are slightly different perspectives presented. One view is that finding a schedule that genuinely aligns with your natural chronotype might actually be more beneficial than trying to force yourself into an early schedule that's constantly fighting your biology.
Makes intuitive sense.
But another view also notes that chronotype isn't entirely fixed. It's influenced by our habits, our lifestyle, and it can potentially be shifted over time with consistent effort and routine changes. So it's not necessarily destiny.
Interesting. So figuring out what genuinely works for you and your own body's tendencies seems critical, rather than just blindly following, say, a rigid 5 a.m. rule.
Right. It seems much more about finding your own sustainable rhythm. And there's another crucial nuance highlighted here, too.
Which is?
What you actually do with the time.
Ah, yes. You mentioned that possibility earlier.
Yeah. Some personal accounts really suggest that the perceived productivity gain might be less about the time of day itself and more about how early risers tend to use those quiet morning hours.
Compared to evenings, maybe?
Exactly. Compared to how many people use evenings for winding down entertainment, maybe scrolling social media, whereas mornings might be used for exercise, planning, focused work.
So it's the intention behind the time.
It seems like a big part of it. Simply being awake earlier doesn't automatically guarantee any of these benefits unless you have an intentional routine and manage that time effectively.
Like having a plan, avoiding distractions.
Right. Not just scrolling in bed an hour earlier.
Okay, that adds a lot of really valuable context. It's clearly a much more complex system than just wake up early.
Definitely.
You need enough sleep, consistent timing, understanding your own rhythm, and then actually using the time effectively.
It's a whole package deal, it seems. And these nuances become really clear when you look at the specific research included.
Like the medical student study.
Exactly. That one offers interesting insights because, medical students are notorious for grappling with demanding, often irregular schedules.
Yeah,
They,
absolutely.
they found a high percentage of them did have irregular sleep habits, sleeping less on weekdays, trying to catch up on weekends,
The classic student pattern.
right? Which aligns with what's sometimes called delayed sleep phase syndrome, that
Yeah.
tendency for the body clock to shift later, especially in young adults.
Okay.
And crucially, this study strongly linked both insufficient sleep and later bedtimes, wake times, to poorer academic performance and higher rates of anxiety and depression among these students.
So both sleep amount and timing mattered.
Yes. And as we mentioned, they specifically found that the timing having an earlier bedtime correlated more closely with better academics and lower anxiety than just the total hours slept.
That timing point is really sticking out.
It is. They also noted some interesting gender differences in their sample. Female students in that particular study were more likely to follow more regular, earlier sleep schedules. And they showed better performance and lower anxiety depression, especially when they got more hours of sleep.
What do they make of that?
Well, the researchers speculated it could mean female students might be more vulnerable to the negative mood effects of insufficient sleep, or perhaps, just in this group, they were better at adopting these health-promoting habits. Hard to say definitively.
Interesting possibility, though. What else?
They also compared day scholars, students living at home, versus hostelers living in dorms.
Oh.
Day scholars tended to have more regular routines, they slept and woke earlier, and had significantly better academic performance and less daytime sleepiness.
So the structure of living at home seemed to help maintain that consistency.
It really seems to reinforce how external structure and environment can influence these consistent, potentially earlier routines and the positive outcomes linked to them.
That's fascinating. Shows how lifestyle, environment, demographics, it all ties into sleep patterns and outcomes, especially in high-pressure situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the study on young children we touched on earlier provides another angle entirely.
Right, the activity link.
Yes. Looking at physical activity in toddlers, their main finding was that clear correlation. Earlier waking time was linked to higher physical activity. Kids who woke up later were consistently less active.
And they thought morning light was key.
That was their hypothesis, that exposure to morning light likely plays a significant role, helping sync the body clock even at that young age, influencing energy and activity levels all day.
But they couldn't prove cause and effect.
No, they were careful about that. Couldn't rule out other factors like maybe sleep deprivation leading to hyperactivity in some cases, or other socioeconomic influences. But the correlation itself was striking.
So it suggests the timing of waking might be tied to how physically active we are, right from our earliest years.
It certainly points in that direction.
So, from toddlers to stressed-out medical students, these sources seem to reveal these consistent patterns, linking earlier, more regular wake times and consistent sleep schedules to positive outcomes, whether that's physical activity, academic success, or mood.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex picture, but those themes, consistency, timing, aligning with light cues, they seem pretty central across the board.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our listener, who sent these sources in? We've certainly seen that waking up early is linked in this material to a whole range of reported benefits.
Physical energy, metabolism, mood, creativity, productivity. The list is appealing.
We've also clearly seen it's far more complex than just setting an alarm for 5 a.m. or whatever time.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
deeply intertwined with getting enough good quality sleep, first and foremost.
Right.
Then maintaining consistency in your sleep-wake schedule, day in, day out. Understanding your own body's preferred rhythm, your chronotype,
Yeah.
and crucially, being intentional and effective at what you actually do with those potentially quieter morning hours.
It seems the most powerful takeaway here isn't necessarily that one specific early time is magic for everyone,
Totally not.
but rather being intentional about your whole sleep schedule, finding a consistent bedtime and wake time that allows enough rest, aligning it as best you can with light cues and maybe your own chronotype.
And then using that morning time effectively.
Right. That combination seems to be what can unlock some significant advantages for your health, your mind, and your ability to get things done based on this material.
Which, raises an important question as a final thought. Given this intricate interplay we've seen between timing, consistency, our individual biology, and how we choose to spend our time,
Yeah.
how might understanding your own body's preferred rhythm and maybe experimenting with small, consistent adjustments to your sleep and morning routine,
Eh,
how might that be the most powerful path forward for you? Something to consider as you navigate your own day and your relationship with that alarm clock.